Architectural delight. Oh, that's right. We're talking architecture. If talking about beauty is wrong, we don't want to be right. Eclectic, modernist, futuristic, guardian, cutting edge, rationalism, vernacular, visionary, pre-postmodern, romantic, invention, beauty, baby, beyond style, with your architect hosts, David Andriozzi, Elizabeth McNicholas, and Dan Morales. Architectural delight, baby. Yeah. Feel me? Oh, come on. Let's get it. Ow. Ooh. It's all here, folks. Look no further. Don't go anywhere. Right here, Architectural Delight.
Welcome to Architectural Delight. My name is David Andriozzi. My co-hosts are Elizabeth McNicholas and Dan Morales. Three architects with three very different perspectives, all in search of a new narrative. We are here with the support of the New England chapter of the ICAA, the Traditional Building Magazine, Residential Design Magazine. Thank you all. At Architectural Delight, we believe that buildings should speak to the places they are built, culturally and contextually, but most importantly, they should delight. We believe that regardless of style, cost, technique, people tend to save buildings that they love the most. Without architectural delight, no building can be truly sustainable. Today, we are honored to spend some time with renowned architect Jeffrey Dungan, recognized for a clean and elegant approach to traditional and vernacular architecture. Jeffrey brings a fresh and welcome voice in the stifled polemics of academia. In addition to his architecture, he brings passion, depth, and an endless enthusiasm for the people he works with. Jeffrey Dungan Architects in Alabama, his work can be seen all over the native South and throughout North and Central America. He has been honored in 2017 with the Southeast Architect of the Year Award by VERANDA magazine and ADAC, as well as numerous awards from the AIA. In 2018 and again in 2019, he received the prestigious Palladio Award, the only national award for classical architecture. I was actually honored to personally sit on one of those juries. He was also honored with two Shutze Awards from the ICAA. In 2018, Jeffrey released his first book, The Nature of Home, Creating Timeless Houses, with Rizzoli Books, where Jeffrey explores different materials and architectural elements that help create what he calls the forever home. Jeffrey, thank you very much for joining us to talk about your journey towards a new modernity.
Thanks, it's great to be here. Great to be able to talk about this thing that we all love so much called design and architecture with you guys.
That's awesome. So I'm going to start with, I've heard you in the past talk about how, which I think is amazing, I want you to restate it, that in your mind, proportions are free. Like they're this tool that is just free for us to use. And if we master it, we're using the proportions of design to make better design. I've always said through learning how to, as we paint, is that shade and shadow are free. The use of shade and shadow are free. In a way, aren't we creating this amazing toolbox where you can look at something as simple as a simple column or an obelisk, and it can be beautiful, and it doesn't have to be expensive. So I'd like you to start there.
Okay. Well, I think that the whole idea of things that are beautiful not being expensive is probably the biggest flaw in my work. I've found that that even though I like the idea that the proportions are free, it actually turns out that they're really hellaciously expensive. But conceptually they should be free. And I guess what I mean about that, and I think there is also some truth to it, you know, if you're going to make a window, let's say, you obviously that the cost of that window is fairly much the same, regardless of the proportion of it, that if you use certain systems that we know work with the human eye and create a sense of rightness, I guess, in the brain or the visual cortex that that might as well make it a good proportion. So I mean, I use a lot of the golden section. I'm sure you guys do too. Basically 1.618 or something like that times whatever the width is, and the height will give you a pretty attractive proportion. And so I use that a lot. And then when you break the window down, especially if you're doing a window with panes, then the muntins and so forth, I've sort of decided a long time ago that 7 inches wide and 11 inches tall is a really nice proportion, which is also, if you do the math on that, it comes pretty close, I think, to the golden section. And so anyway, there's sometimes I like to go a little bit more vertical and to create a little bit more of a sense of elegance than the golden section would allow you to if you strictly used it. But anyway, another thing I love to use is just the rule of thirds, which is, we can all see that even in photography or even on your, social media. I think Instagram kind of breaks the grid, the picture into thirds. And so there's just different rules that, that I like to use that tend to help the proportions be better and more pleasing.
It's interesting that you bring up the windows, because one of the things that I learned very early on, or I was taught, and that there's always rules, then you can break the rules, but was that, in turn of the century, and especially in the shingle style, that divided lights really would, and even back before that, should match from window to window. Again, there are definitely exceptions with windows and variations, but the thought that in the old days, we used to order a window, and you'd order at a lumberyard, it was a 6/8, and then whether it was a double hung or an awning or a casement really didn't matter, because they were it was built from the divided light outwards, and then they give you the rough opening. And I was taught early on that by setting a relationship with the window panes, it makes you less focused on the window panes, and it makes the design more anthropomorphic. And I'm wondering, so I've heard you mention many times and heard you written about the importance of divided lights, and I'm wondering if that's sort of the same track thought.
I think so. I'm not sure about the, starting from the panes and then going out to the sash or whatever, but I always really start with the overall shape of the window, just the proportion of the window, and then whatever the proportion of that window is, basically I draw a diagonal from the top right corner to the bottom left, and then I make sure that or as much as I can, I try to make all the panes line up with that diagonal, which by rule of math and geometry makes all the panes be the same proportion as the window itself. If that makes any sense. You can't always do that, of course. There's all kinds of crazy things that come into conflict with that. Like, for instance, a door. As soon as you put a door in a wall next to a bunch of windows, as we know, typically the door sash as it goes around is more like 4, 5, 6 inches wide, and the sash on the window is more like 2 or 3 inches. So you've got a problem there that you're instantly kind of confronted with. So there's lots of things that break up all those rules.
Hey Jeffrey, can I make a high level exclamation?
Yeah.
I look at it's so interesting that you sort of like stepping off and describing your design process sort of would actually be so rooted in a rigorous adherence to sort of proportional systems when I perceive your work. The thing that seems most remarkable is how
loose
freeform. Yeah. So could you talk about sort of the balance then between the rigor and the, I don't know.
Yeah, it's true. I think we all drive ourselves a little bit batshit crazy with, all of these, divergent things. I do tend to work from a very big picture. down. My little pea brain can't think about things like the proportion of the panes until I'm happy with the overarching proportion of the roofs and the massing and those kind of things. So I go from very general to specific almost always. And so I'm really intent on that thing kind of having this general sense of looseness that I think you're kind of putting your finger on, and I appreciate you noticing that because I think it's very important. I think the idea, the overarching idea that I'm trying to get at is comfort. And that goes, of course, all the way to the interiors. But I think even just from the big picture, while we're zoomed out, the massing of the roofs and the way the house fits the site, those things sort of give you a first impression. And I'm just one of those people, if you don't have me at hello, you'll never have me. So I sort of project that onto everybody else and assume that you really need to grab people's interest at the very first glimpse of the thing. And I want it to say certain things at that level, just as a lump. And then, eventually once I'm satisfied with the roof lines and those things, then I get into the windows. But at first it's really just, I want a big wall of glass here, and it's just a big, rectangle. And then I start to break it down. And then, the math in me kind of comes out at that point. But, it doesn't matter really, right? I mean, when you look at it, it's either good or it's bad. And we all make certain judgments about that thing. So it doesn't matter if it's bad, but then you're like, yeah, but all my panes are, the golden section. Well, yeah, but if the overall thing is not composed in a way that we find it interesting and beautiful, it really doesn't matter. All the math in the world won't solve that problem for you. So there's something I think beyond math that I'm trying to get at in the work, and I think it's something that's more emotional and more spiritual.
Well, I've heard you speak about how a really good house is kind of like a bespoke coat, and the way it just suits you just right, and it feels like it's a part of you, an extension of you. Could you zoom out a bit further back and introduce the human psychological aspect of when you meet the client? How do you go about mining their psychology, the land, and how can you go back to what those initial sketches are derived from and how you then draw them through?
Man, that's a good question. And I think so much of what we do is 100% psychological. And I mean, I just would say that as a blanket statement over everything, that there's so much human, right? Like there's so much human in which regards goes to people's personality. And I always tell people, look, your house is going to say things about you to the public as they drive by, to people that know you, people that don't know you. Your house is going to make a statement about you, whether you like it or not. Okay, so why don't, since we're able and we have this incredible, amazing luxury to design a house for you, let's make sure that it celebrates the best things about that person. And to me, that is important, but it's very intuitive, right, and very subjective. But people have an affect, right, in their personality, the way they communicate, if they're very cerebral, if they like to joke around a little bit, if they love to entertain, if they like to drink, or if they are very, whatever. So all of those different elements, to me, I can sort of subjectively absorb from my clients, and then I try to put that into the house somehow, and it comes out in the interiors, but I still, back to that big picture, I want the house to say the right things about them and some things that are true about them, but we'll celebrate the good and not talk about the bad parts of the people, right? Because there's plenty of bad in the world already. So I don't know. That's probably not a nail in the coffin answer to your question, but I think that's where I approach it from. And then the rest of it is, as you say, the site and the context and being a good neighbor, basically, you know, to the different architecture or the context around. If it's only natural, then great. I still want to find that little nook in the site, that not where a house could go, but where the site almost is inviting you to put a house, where the earth could almost be made better if that was possible by a structure. So it ends up looking like it kind of grew there. Or if it's in a neighborhood, then, you know, I want the house to go along with the neighborhood, but I also want it to, you know, have something to say that's unique, hopefully, in some kind of architectural way. And there's one of my friends said one time, for the piece of architecture to be a gift to the street.
That's the title of one of my favorite books, the one from San Francisco. And they were celebrating the vernacular builder carpenters that, you know, immigrated through the Midwest and were building these gingerbread, what architects at the time considered horrible. And, you know, and now, you know, when they were tearing all these down after 20, 30 years of modernism, the San Franciscans published that book called A Gift to the Street, wow, realizing that it's just all that beauty that you put into the work is just a gift to the people that, you know, it's a delight to the people that look at it.
Exactly right. And while we could all sort of have differing opinions about stylistic things or whatever, but we can all look at a good piece of architecture and agree that basically it's really has some good moments to it. And yeah, I love that idea of the gift to the street.
Yeah.
But to your question, I mean, I just think that psychology plays such a huge role in the work and how it affects us as we experience it, you know, from a distance, from the street. Maybe the only way we'll ever experience that house if we don't know the people that happen to live there or whatever. But especially when you go inside, there's all kinds of, you know, emotional moments that I'm trying to create. And so the design work, you know, that we're doing with sticks and bricks and plaster and arches or beams or glass or tile, it's all headed towards, or trying to head the user towards a certain emotional experience.
It's interesting, like the fundamentals that you're talking about, we talk about as sort of probably being born in the picturesque movement hundreds of years ago, which is this moment where you're trying to get the sense of the space and the property and the land and the culture and the people, which was also a political movement and an art movement and an architecture movement. I'm curious how you translate that when you have a client that comes to you and says, this imagery resonates with me from your portfolio and I'd like it over here. And it doesn't necessarily have the same design DNA that where it was designed in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happened. It's happened more since the book came out in about this time in 2018, and some of the clients use it as kind of like a catalog. Like, okay, I want the kitchen on 156, and I never, you know, it kind of blew up in my face a little bit. I was like, you know, I never thought that would be the case, but it's helpful on the one hand because it shows you in a very direct way, you know, what they're drawn towards and what kinds of things resonate with them. And so there's a lot of good information that can be gleaned from that. But, you know, I'm never interested in trying to repeat things that we've done in the past exactly, although, you know, we've only got so many tricks in the book. You know, every mind can only, you know, it's limited in a certain way. But you know, I always tell my clients, look, you know, I like steak and I like peanut butter, but I don't like them together. And so, you know, you can take a lot of things that might be good things, but they don't always go together. And so I think the editing process is what is so important. And the use of restraint, which is my favorite of all the classical, you know, tenets that I always try to hold to, is that there's some level of restraint. And I think when you consider things in those ways, then you'll be able to sort of boil it down to something that that makes sense for that place and for those people. But yeah, it's the editing is never fun. You know, who wants to be edited? Even when I wrote the book, it was the editing that was the most painful part, but a very important part.
In terms of getting to the right level of restraint, do you find that you're, you know, able to sort of get to that edge and stop, or are you scaling back from, you know, overshooting?
I find myself getting a little bit over my skis all the time. It even happened this morning. It's a little bit why I was late to getting together with you guys, because I was going at it, and then I sat back and looked at what I had done, and I was like, yeah, that's not it, dude. Like, that's not this house. That's not this room. It was an interior moment that we were trying to create. And I think you have to be able to stand back and look at what you're doing and not fall in love with your own shit, right? Like, that's to me the most dangerous thing, because once you fall in love with it, then it's precious, you know, and now you can't really see it anymore. So I think, you know, I always say nobody's harder on Jeff Dungan than Jeff Dungan is and tries to be. But I still sometimes tend to get over my skis because I'm an emotional person, and I'm trying to kind of create emotion. And so, you know, you can become emotional. And so that's the part that I fight with myself internally, is getting to that line and saying, yes, that's exactly it. That's just enough. And that's good. And now let's just move on to the next thing. That is, I wouldn't say I've mastered that art whatsoever.
Do you have, to that point, do you have someone in your office, or maybe your wife and your family, that, like John Wilburn Root, you know, from your neck of the woods originally, and Daniel Burnham were a great team up in Chicago. And Daniel Burnham used to be the check on John Wilburn Root's emotionalism, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
He would always, you know, beat him over the head and say, you know, calm down, pull back. I use my wife, who's an architect, but I'll really use anyone, because anyone and everyone will eventually look at your house. So you just keep shopping it around for emotional sort of tests. Do you have that process in your office or someone else?
I do. We do have some processes in place that help a lot with that. I have a wife as well, and while she's not trained as an architect, she's been knocking around with me for some time, and she has a great, you know, sense of just things. And I actually love it that she's not an architect. You know, she doesn't know any better, so she's just looking at it, and it's either good or it's not. But from a layman's perspective, but she does have that that sense about things. And it's so funny, because usually if there's some part that I know I haven't really sussed it out, I haven't really resolved some little element or some little part, man, she'll go right to it and go, well, now what's happening right here? I don't really understand. I'm like, I was like, don't even talk to me about that. I'm still working on that part. She always finds it. And to me, it's just proof that, you know, I really haven't resolved some aspect of it. But then, so there's her, there's also the client, right? I mean, they have opinions, and you know, sadly, you know, we have to listen to them. I'm just kidding. Obviously they're going to live in the house, and so it needs to work for them, and it needs to appeal to them. But there's that always that we have. But then we started doing something a few years ago, and it's really wonderful. So we've got, I don't know, you know, 25 or 30 projects going on all over the country and outside the country. And we've got about 15 people working. And so, you know, everybody's, you know, working on their 3 or 4 projects. And so we was kind of two things. I think it was for the overall good of the firm, for everybody to get to see things that other people were working on. And the other thing that was great for was just the design to just kind of pin it up and just kind of what I call just bomb it, you know. And so when we get to the DD level, we pin the site plan, the floor plans, exterior elevations, just everything we got. But while it's still malleable and we can still change it, we kind of present it. I'll talk for a little while, and then the project architect will talk. And usually we'll do it over lunch, you know, or sometimes we'll do it in the latter part of the day, and we'll have cocktails and some snacks, and just pin it up, and everybody, you know, say how it strikes them. And it goes from everything to, wow, this kitchen layout kind of could be a little bit, something's wrong over here, to the roof line's too tall over here, or this dormer is not big enough. It could be anything. Big ideas and a lot of small ideas, but we have found that to be a great resource for the elevation of the work, and really a heck of a lot of fun too. I have to kind of sit back and not talk too much, where everybody feels like it's okay to kind of say whatever. And you know, sadly, they've gotten really courageous about, you know, telling me what they think.
Jeffrey, I mean, you have a really unique sensibility. How long does it take your people to, when they join you, to come up to speed? Talk a little bit more, if you would, about, you know, the people that are supporting the work of the firm.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a great question. It's almost better to take somebody right out of school and just really let them kind of come up through the ranks. It's almost harder to take somebody and then they have to unlearn things that they had learned. Not that necessarily they were wrong, just not what I call our version of the truth. But I found that it takes at least it really, honestly, and there's a spectrum, right? Some people kind of really take to it like a duck to water a little bit quicker. You know, but I'd say at least 12 months, and before they're really facile and they can really run with it, about 18. And if they came right out of school, then it's more like 18 to 24, maybe. But they're still just learning, you know, basic blocking and tackling at that point. So it's not necessarily you know, our, you know, style or our process that's you know, so confusing. It's just that this is a old man's profession that we're all involved in.
I'm going to ask you probably a really impossible question. It's a real compliment. Your work is so beautiful and it's so sculptural. And it's so distinctive. And yet we try and balance between being overly sculptural to the point where it doesn't resonate with the people, and it becomes more about the architect and less about the object and the gift, like you were saying, or to around you. And like it's a delicate thing to balance, but you do an amazing job pushing it right to that envelope and saying, no, we're going to have fun, we're going to move classicism, we're going to use classical and traditional details, and we're going to go and use that to build this sculpture, but it's going to relate to and resonate to people, which is different than true modern sculptural.
Wow, that's an amazing question. You're kind of making me tear up a little bit. That is a wonderful thing to say. I really appreciate that. I think the thing that resonates with me the most is sculpture, and I think as much as I can, I'm gonna not get emotional. I really want it to be a sculptural thing in the end, even though it has to go through that gauntlet of the client, the budget, the site, the you know, the rules and gravity and all those other things. That sculpture is really what I'm after. And yeah, there's that. You really got me on that. I can't believe you said that word. It means so much to me that you would feel that you would notice that I don't know what your question was, but yeah, that's what I'm after. But I think that, let me tell you a story. So I got out of college, and I went to Auburn University, and I got out, and my mission in life was to scare the world with a new architectural forms, and I love forms, that goes with sculpture. And so I had some family friends, and we had that invited me to design their house, and I was straight out of Compton, and so here I go, I'm going to scare the world with this new architecture. And so I designed a couple of houses, just kind of on the side, on my own. I was working during the day, and I did this just for family and friends, and worked with a wonderful builder, and learned a lot about the construction process through him. And I was like 24 years old. I mean, I had no business even designing for human beings, much less I should have just been doing dog houses or something. But I stood back and looked at my creation, and instead of scaring the world with new architecture, the only person I scared, I think, was me. And I was just like, oh my God, this is really bad. And so I just took a step back, and I mean, it had a few good moments, but it wasn't great. And I just wasn't anywhere close to being there. And so it was at that time that I went back and started looking at things that did resonate with me. And I went back and started studying the history that I should have been paying more attention to in my architectural history classes. And I fell in love with Lutjens and Voysey and McMurdoch and the Red House and Webb and all of these people, especially McIntosh, because as you would probably figure, his more organic looking work was a great appeal to me. And so that sort of repositioned me, but I gave up on trying to scare the world with this new architecture, but I'm still after that, the form and the sculptural quality of the work.
The idea that you were talking about, like scaring the world, I comes to mind my modernist schooling, where it was always encouraged that you be the avant-garde, dictating what everyone ought to like in the future, where we're all headed, what we're all evolving to be, etc. All of that stuff, all that pablum. And so to marry another point into this comment is that anyone looking at your work might just say, oh, he's traditionalist, or he's into arts and crafts, vernacular, as much as
those things are true.
Yeah. So my question is, what was that psychological break for you, where you just realized, wait a minute, I'm kind of giving these people this, I don't know, dogmatic view of what architecture needs to be. And it sounded like you had to check in with yourself emotionally to say, why am I leaving that on the table? Can you describe a bit, especially to young architects who are having to go through this, as many of us have, this transformation into something that's a little more humane?
Yeah, I think, for me, I just wasn't able to meet the needs of the client and the budget and all of those rigorous, things and the structure, and still have this thing that was avant-garde. I mean, it really looked like I took like a regular house and just kind of crunched it into some kind of crazy thing. I mean, it was not good. And I just, I just had to call it for what it was. I mean, the people were totally happy. I mean, they still live there. I mean, I'd be mortified if they heard me say what I said, but it was definitely a kind of a wake-up call for me. And I was just trying to do things that were really just beyond my true artistic ability. And I just I just wasn't there. And so in going back and looking at historic things that did speak to me, that I did still believe were sculptural, I found something that I felt like I could work with. But at the same time, I've tried to sort of make those things my own and do my own version of those things. So they have become my own. They're in my memory. They're in my, you know, my muscle memory, if you will, of my mind. When I'm drawing, all those things just kind of come out of my heart. But initially, they certainly had their roots in the largely 1890s to, you know, 1915 or 20, and a whole bunch of you know, British people doing some wonderful things that actually also, you know, had a lot of what we would call modernism in it. Voicey, you know, with his clean planes and a lot of the Lechin stuff. You know, at the time, nobody realizes that, you know, a lot of people credited Voicey with being sort of the father of, you know, a lot of modernism kind of thinking, which of course he just projectile vomited over that. But when you look at his work, there is something that's really clean to it. And I think that is what really resonated with me and what I try to get at in a lot of what I'm trying to do. I don't know if that really answered your question, but that's
No, that's fine. I mean, like David said, some of these questions are impossible to answer with 3 sentences, because, you know, the person you worked for when you were young, and, you know, your grandmother's house, and you just, you know, you could spend the years, and it'd be for naught. You know.
Well, we touched on it some yesterday when we talked a little bit, and I think you're exactly right about that. A lot of the stuff that was already in me, and I really discovered this only when I wrote the book, because I had to really question myself about why do I do certain things the way I do it, and it comes from the perspective of nature, and that's where, you know, the title of the book, The Nature of Home, was trying to kind of use that word in a dual kind of entendre kind of way, but comes from organic things. And I mean, I growing up on a farm and just being steeped in nature, and you know, even as a young boy, going out in the woods with my dog for, you know, hours and hours on end, sometimes almost all day. We'd stay out there, you know, it just, the shape of trees, you know, and the way they're bigger at the bottom, and the way they branch out in their sculptural nature, and the way they play against each other, the canopy of the trees coming together in roof lines. And as I started to draw houses, I just could not draw that line, that vertical line, that wall just straight down. It was almost like I couldn't help it. It had to sort of drift and get wider at the bottom. And so then I started thinking, well, how the hell do you build like, I mean, how can I build something like that? And how do you get those kind of details in a soft, hopefully subtle way into it? And how much of that flair is too much? You know, what's the angle that's just enough for it to be there and be almost not even perceptible? How do you do that without making it a cartoon, you know?
Actually, in your adult life now, so you brought that you know, basis of growing up in nature into your, you know, early years of your profession. Do you purposefully dedicate time to touring and taking in more nature scenes? What's the balance of, you know, looking that you do at the natural world versus built, if at all?
That's a great question. I mean, I can really consider myself a sponge. I mean, 100% a sponge. And so one of my favorite quotes is Gaudi, and I know you'll be shocked that I would be at all interested in his work, but he said, "The tree outside my studio has taught me all I need to know about architecture." And you know, when you walk into Sagrada Familia, you see those, you know, columns go up 60, 70, 80 feet in, you know, 3 different kinds of, you know, stone, and then split off and splinter off and into, you know, limbs and supporting mechanisms, and you feel like you might be inside somebody's lung, like that just, you know, that tells me everything I need to know about what I need to be thinking about. And of course, I'll never do anything like that, that structure, but I think the same inspiration that had such an effect on Gaudi is the same that I derive a lot of my inspiration from. And so I mean, it has everything to do with pattern. You know, you can just look at the leaves on the ground, you know, this time of year when they're all falling, and they fall in very random ways, but they make this amazing pattern. And I'll take pictures of that, and sometimes we'll, you know, we're working on a project right now where we're working on some patterns that have that kind of thing to it. So I don't know what it is, but it's just a prevailing kind of organic thing that's going on. And you know, like another example might be something as simple as I love to use wood on the interiors, but instead of panelizing that and formalizing that, many times we'll just use wooden planks, you know, on the wall. And I found instantly that I usually didn't want to use all the same width. So we started mixing together all these different widths. So like if you've ever, you know, just stopped and look, especially in the South, we've got these pine trees that just look like little sticks all over the place. And when you look into a pine forest, all you see is all these lines. And because of the depth, all those lines, of course, don't line up, even if the trees are planted for forestry reasons in a grid. When you look at them at a distance, they have moments where they diverge. And so I just found that I really like to mix 4-inch boards with 6-inch boards and 8-inch boards. And I do the same thing on roofs. I've got 2 or 3 different textures and 2 or 3 different colors. And the poor roofer's like, how do we lay this? And I'm like, just pick it up and just put it up there. Like, just let it be as random as possible. So there's something about randomness that I really like, and find a lot of that in nature. But then at the same time, of course, there's order, you know, in nature. There's incredible order but it's a loose order, right? It's not a man-made order. It's not a grid. Man, I hate grids. So yeah, I don't know.
So
Well, I mean, go ahead.
Well, I was say, you know, I have no idea what your sort of spiritual sort of condition is currently, but to me, it sounds like you're doing your best to emulate the creator with a capital C.
Capital C.
Is
Correct.
that sort of, would you say so?
That is 1000% the case.
Cool.
That's very true. Yeah, I mean, I grew up, you know, Southern, and so I had family and parents and that you know, believed certain things about, you know, how we all got here and the world. And of course, there was very large segments of my life. In fact, probably most of it that I probably was the antithesis of following any of those tenets or philosophies or thought processes. But you know, I came back to it and have seen it as being actually the truth of the matter. And it is. I have found, not always, I wish this was more the case, but that from a spiritual perspective, since we're touching on that I feel the closest to God, not in church, but when I'm drawing and when I'm creating. And I realize sometimes in some of those moments that that's what he put me here to do, and that he made all of us in that way. And I feel something of a closeness and a relationship to this being that as far as we know, his first movement was to create, right? And so there's something really powerful and poignant about that when we get to do that in our own, maybe even feeble human way, that we're connecting with him in that way. I think
Jeffrey, that's what the young people call a mic drop. You just basically define the solution of architecture in your soul, what to me, which is that you have this responsibility to the past, to the people around you, and to the future. And you take that on as a responsibility, and it's the most important bonding thing. And if we could teach every young student and young architect that one principle, the style doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah. I think the style, the whole thing about style is, you know, to me, it's really a handicap in a lot of ways. It's nothing more. The whole idea of style is just so that people can feel like they understood something. If they can label it, then they can feel like, oh, okay, well, that's Tudor, or that's English, or that's modern, or that's traditional. Then they can just kind of go on their merry way. And I think, you know, that's, of course, there's so much more depth to that question. But you know, style to me is when people ask me what style is, you know, some project that we've done, or what style is my work, I say, you know, I'll leave that to other people to figure out. I'm really not interested in trying to label what we're doing, and I hope it's impossible. I hope it would be something that just wouldn't fit, you know, because it's not true of the work. That there's a lot of different pieces of architecture and different things that, even if we treat it as a style, that we are melding together in ways that don't fit any one of those particular slides.
I want to respond to one other comment that you made just before we went on to, we took this little path, which was that wonderful experience you have of creating things in the field and having them be natural. And to me, when I hear you say that, it's like the difference between theoretical design and empirical design, where you basically say, and to me, that means a grandfather taught a father, taught a son what's right, and didn't necessarily take it out of a book. It's what you've been taught. Take it from your soul. And I think that's just a cool way to look at it.
I really think that's true. And I think it's the best test, you know, that we can give ourselves, is when you look at whatever it is you're drawing, is there a lot right about it? And that's not to say that there's not some things that you need to refine further, or they don't really ring true yet. But is it an honest expression, you know? And did you come at this with a bunch of preconceived ideas, or are you really just reacting to the client and the site and those things that are I just think if you can find a way to clear your mind and just and get to the place where you can do that, that's when I see that the work is really the best. And of course it has a lot to do too with the client and the freedom that they give you or don't give you. I've definitely had some clients where I had to tell them I was going to need to pry their cold dead fingers off of their house so I could draw it for them.
Well, that's you know, I find when I work with different people, it's like having a relationship with different people. You accommodate yourself to them to a degree, and some you just obviously don't work with. But sometimes you end up being drawn into a place where you discover something new about yourself, or, you know, and so, you know, whether you're sort of taking an order at a restaurant, or whether you're, you know, just kind of experimenting and hoping they like what you've prepared, I personally find satisfaction out of both, because one of them is more of a caretaker, you know, like I raised this cat right, or I raised this child right.
Right.
Feel like they're going to be whoever they are, but doggone it, they did it on a platform that I gave them, that they gave them that freedom. So anyway, I don't know where this is going, but
no, I can totally pick up on that, and I'm not sure if this is what you meant or not, but I've had this happen just a few times lately, and it was really wonderful where the client said something that it wasn't wrong. Okay. It just wasn't where I was headed. Right.
Yeah.
But I'm like, okay, but I know this is a good person, and I know this is just coming from their heart. This is what I would call the truth.
Yeah.
And sometimes the truth is incredibly inconvenient. And I just had to kind of step back and go, wow. And I just took that as a point of just totally flipping the whole thing and just going, and at least at this point, on this point, I just pivoted right there and just turned and just poured every creative bit of my soul into that idea. And I think it felt so good, that we didn't have to butt heads about that I was able to be creative enough to see things, or to see especially that one thing, whatever that was, in a totally different way than the way I was seeing it. So it is wonderful when that can happen, and I hope that can happen more and more often. But sometimes people are just wrong, or they don't understand something, and so you have to try to help them, see that perspective. And then if they still insist on this other way, then it's like you said, it's okay, I'm more of a caretaker on this issue. I try not to just throw up my hands and say, okay, well, I'm going to pout now because you didn't go along with me on this. But sometimes I do pout a little bit. but then it goes away, and I'm like, all right. I have a drink and sleep on it and get up the next day, and then have a different mindset. But
well, yeah. I think you put your finger on it when you said if it's coming from inside of them and it's their truth, there's no arguing that.
That's exactly right.
Whether you like it or not. And sometimes people do it because they feel belittled by you in some way, or they feel challenged, and you can recognize that. Hopefully, as I've gotten older, I've been like, okay, well, this person's feeling a little challenged, and I'll just sit back a bit and let the bull run around for a bit until they learn to trust me a bit more, and then all of a sudden they might listen to you more. But sometimes it's irreconcilable, and you politely excuse yourself.
I will say this about clients that I think it was Lutjens that said there is no great architecture without great clients. I think he used
great patrons.
Patrons. I think he used that a different word, but it's the same idea, right? That to a large degree, in fact, an infinitely large degree, we are limited by the freedom with which they will enable us to do our thing. And also not just the freedom, like they're not involved in the process at all, but in as much as we can create this, not just I'm here and you're here, but we become a we kind of thing. That's when it's really great, right? That's when you really can kind of take off and really enjoy this kind of new creative relationship that you build with these people, and the trust, both ways that you develop. And it's rare, but I've had a few times when we got to do more than just one house for a client, and that second time, oh my gosh, the conversations were so much easier, and the communication was so much more fluid, and the bravery was higher because the trust was so elevated. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing when that can happen. But in every relationship, there's different ways that the relationship kind of works. But I have been very blessed to have lots of amazing, wonderful clients who without which, of course, we couldn't do the work at the level that we sometimes are able to achieve.
Pretty remarkable. You said that the people who believed in you and gave you the opportunity to design the first houses that you designed are still living there, and
they are.
You admit that sort of like where you started was sort of not super elegant, and you've moved down this more and more refined and beautiful trajectory. in the next 40 or 50 years of your career? Is there, you know, will you be shifting? Will you be static? What's interesting to you now in terms of
Well,
next
God bless you for
frontiers?
saying the next 40 or 50
I know.
years. That
That's very optimistic.
that would be awesome.
You're
Yeah.
30, right?
It kind of reminds me of a client that I love. He's almost like my dad or my granddad, and he's probably was about really close to 80, and he was asking me what kind of roof I wanted to put on the house that we were designing. And I said this house is gonna have a cedar shake roof on it. And he said, oh yeah, I like cedar shake roofs. And he goes, yeah, but they kind of take a little bit of maintenance. I said, a little bit. He said, but then you have to replace them. And I said, well, you won't. You know, and he looked at his wife and he's like, did he really say that? And I said, look, dude, I hope you live forever, but you know, the odds are that you're not. And but I definitely think this will get you 25 years down the road or somebody. But I think to answer your question, I think anybody that thinks of themselves, and I think we're all in this category, as a creative person, okay, that is, people are paying to make and use their creativity and parlay their creativity in such a way that can make other people's lives better, and more beautiful and more elegant and more interesting and more functional and more enduring, and more sustainable, and all those things. If I can just stretch that creativity just a little bit farther and say that we're in some way or form we are artists, then I would say that no good artist does not evolve. And you can look into history, and I'm a huge fan of a lot of the mid-century modernists and Picasso, and look at Picasso's work and look at how it evolved. He went through phases, and he was always stretching, always trying new things and new ideas. He was never static in his work. And I think, you know, only in architecture can we become sort of so easily pigeonholed and into like, we do this and people just come at you, you know, for this. And so I'm always, I've always been determined to continue to be a thinking type person and be a sponge to new ideas and new things, and not everything. I mean, I'm limited, you know, my brain can only take in so much information, and I only find so many things interesting. But for me, I've always tried to continue to stretch and continue to try, you know, new things, and even in the simplest of ways, where every project that we do, I try to do one thing I've never done in a house before. Okay. It could just be the way I orient the boards on the wall, or, I mean, or, you know, the headers over the window or something, but I'm trying to, hopefully it's a little bit more meaningful than that, but I'm trying to find one new thing that I challenge myself with every time. That, and so when somebody asks me for something kooky, that's the perfect excuse. I'm like, oh, wow. Like, okay, we've never done that before. And so here's an opportunity to try something new.
It's exploring, it's pushing the envelope. That's a beautiful process.
Yeah. Otherwise, I get bored really easy. I'm sure you guys do too. And it's like, I don't want to keep doing it that way. Even like something that I love, like there'll be a piece of trim. Like I love these little bitty base trims that are like that big. And I found this perfect little thing. It was basically like a belly mold. Y'all know what a belly mold is, right? Mm-hmm. And I found this belly mold, and then we tweaked it a little bit, and we got it to be our own little belly mold. And man, we just used it and used it and used it. And one day I just said, man, I'm sick of that belly mold. We do it every time. Like, what else we got? Like, why can't we do a tall base with a cap or something? You know, I don't know. Like, we got to just figure something else out. Like, we can't do that anymore. Stop doing that. So sometimes the enemy is you, right? Of you know, evolving and all that kind of stuff. But I'm very interested in, like you say, pushing the envelope and exploring, and and evolving. And I've even noticed in my drawings, I think right now I'm in a period where I really am going, I like things cleaner and cleaner and cleaner and more and more and more simple. Maybe not simplistic, but I really have gotten to where I really don't want things to be too busy or too confusing. And I think I tend to layer on sometimes one too many things, and I'm trying to stop, slap my hand and make it simpler.
When you're developing, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just gonna say, when you're developing in this way, and in the way you're being drawn to, if we're simplifying, and let's say you've got an initial concept and you've sketched it out, I'm just curious about your process. Do you work by employing shadows to see how the form jumps out, or do you work more in a two-dimensional compositional way, or do you employ SketchUp, or do you just kind of 3D your own ideas? I mean, how do you get there in your way?
So my process, and we touched on this earlier, the way I describe my process is a funnel. Okay, and a funnel is wide at the top and ever more narrow as it moves down to the bottom, and then finally at the bottom only one drop comes out. And I can't do the details until I'm satisfied every layer as I go along. So it starts with just the really broad brush. It's a very almost like an emotional reaction to the site and the context and the client. I've already done my work on the client, and I've already kind of understood them to a certain degree that I feel comfortable, and understood their program to a much more defined degree. And then I just go to the property with them, and I look at the views, I look at the topo, and I see how the sun comes across, and then I say, all right, let's go. We'll go get in a bar or a bistro or the hood of the car, and I'll just take the site plan and start to say, okay, strategically, here's how I'd attack this piece of property. And so here we go. And then, the driveway kind of goes here, and then you'll see the house, and then you won't see the house, and then you'll see the house again when you're over here. And so, the great room's got to go here because there's the view. And so it's just these big broad brush kind of, love making with the site. And then, at some point I feel like, okay, this is kind of becoming this little embryo, of a doodle. It's not even what you could at all call a floor plan or even a partie. I guess it's just this thing with a bunch of, stuff. And then there's enough to it that I can see the relationship of the rooms. That's important, right? Just the relationship of the rooms. And some of that has to do with how the house needs to fit the site, and some of it has to do with where the views are, and some of it has to do with where the views aren't, and where I want to maybe even shield a view, like there's a bad view over here of some house that's not so great. And so that's, there's a whole strategy for that. And then there's the sun, because I'm trying to get light in from multiple different directions. But the whole time I'm doing that, I'm thinking in my head, how am I going to get a roof on this thing?
Yeah.
So then I take a piece of paper, and I'm like, and I just start really just with just shapes, almost like just charcoal, kind of just very, very loose. I try to look at that floor plan basically and say, okay, how would the roof lines, and how would I create hierarchy, with these roof forms? I tend to work from a perspective of taking a house and exploding it. So there's a bunch of different pieces. There's a garage with an apartment above it, and then there's the master bedroom wing that's kind of separated over here, and then there's the main, living spaces. And so I tend to explode that out, and then the trick is how you reconnect it once you explode it. But that gives you all these little smaller buildings that are much more, they're not intimidating to walk up to, right? Because they're more of a human scale. But the other thing that enables you to do is develop all these outdoor spaces in between the boxes. Is the interesting thing is what happens in between the boxes, in terms of the outdoor spaces and porches, things like that. And so then I just start doodling the kind of this idea of the roof lines, it's so loosey-goosey, but you can get an idea from it. You can be like, oh, wow, you know, there's, okay, I can see kind of just a very loose, ephemeral kind of house sort of emerging from that. And that's how I start. That's the beginning. And then I just take it to, sometimes then I'll put it to a scale, like a really small scale. I learned this from Bill Clinton. I try to draw things that are what I call sufficiently deniable. So I draw all these things, like my floor plans are like literally like 2.5 inches long. That way, if they're like, well, I'm not sure I want to put the pool there, I'm like, no, that's not the swimming pool. That's your master bedroom. So it's very handy. But the truth of it is, it doesn't let me go to that level of, well, now the door swings don't work right here, or none of that. I'm just trying to get the, you know, basic blocking and tackling done. And I find if I draw that really microscopically, it won't allow the paralysis of analysis, which I loathe.
Yep. Yeah.
And so I keep it really small there, and but enough meat on the bone where the client can see it and kind of agree, yeah, this feels good to us in very broad brush terms. And then I bring it here and I draft it out. Usually I'll draw it at maybe 1 to 20 or 1 to 30 when I'm there with them. And then I'll bring it to 1 to 10. I used to do 330 seconds. I love 330 seconds. And I did it for like, I don't know how long. And I just accidentally did 1 to 10. And I was like, holy shit, 330 seconds is like a gnat's ass from being 1 to 10. So it's basically the same scale, but it makes it so much easier to go from the site plan to the schematics when you're just basically doubling it in size from 1 to 20 to 1 to 10. So I just figured that out, like, I don't know, 2 years ago. So that's kind of new.
Well, that kind of explains how you know, when you talk about making it sing or making it immediately appeal, that keeps that paralysis from analysis out, and make sure that thread stays through when you bring it into, you know, the larger scale.
Exactly right. The proportions, again, now we're dealing with proportions, right? But not in window panes, but in proportion of, you know, the garage and the suite above the garage is way too much taller than the main roof line of the house. Like that's back asswards. Like, so I got to do something to either dumb this down or make this bigger.
Yeah. Know? So you kind of push some of the program maybe this way, or come up with a rationale for that. And then the whole thing starts to be a symphony, and you say, okay, I'll listen to this on loop.
Exactly. But I do some of that I can do on the fly, right? And some of that you could pick up on and just intuitively and go, I don't know, this too much of the program's over here and I need to squish some of it over here. But it really is kind of like Play-Doh in that way. And I definitely see it as being something very loose, very malleable, you know, which I think Elizabeth pointed out right from the jump, that hopefully that still comes through, that there's something loose, you know, in it. And I just find I'm like, shocker, you can't tell this about me, but I'm not a very formal person. And it's fine. I work for people that are more formal, that we're all different, but I hope that there's something more comfortable about being in blue jeans and a you know, sweater jacket than there is in being in a suit and a tie, right? And so I want for the client, and I want for people that even see it, for it to feel a comfort, you know, from it and towards it, that it's just not it's not, what's the word? It's not stiff. It's not stiff.
Rigid. I wanted to jump in and just say, if anybody has any questions to ask, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. We have one here already, which we can start with, but I just wanted to lay that out. Thank you so much. We're over an hour already. So I figured,
oh my gosh,
we'll get sight for the finish line for you.
Awesome.
It was interesting, the point that you brought up about combining a lot of ingredients when you were describing that. And I'm not a chef. My son happens to be, but you almost describe French cooking, right? Escoffier. It's like you start with many different things, and at the end you're presenting one flavor. And so you sort of like that. When I saw you funnel, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. You try to boil it down, and that, again, to the point about restraint, that's what that's what's a big struggle for me, because, you know, and I'm sure you guys face the same thing, you know, you know too much. You've got too many different flavors, and oh, I could do this or I could do that. Well, when you can do anything, you know, if you've got too many options, you can't get there. So you've got to sort of force yourself to make, you know, choices and say, okay, I'm going to use these 3 ingredients right here. And you know, maybe I'll have a splash of a 4th or a 5th, but I'm really just going to focus on these 3 things, because in the end, you want it to be coherent. You want the sculpture, right, to read. And I always say, you know, it's kind of like if you've ever played golf, if you notice that there's no place on the scorecard for an explanation. And architecture is exactly the same.
Yep.
I don't get to put a plaque on the front of the damn house that says, now this client really was hard and this budget was really tight. You don't get to, it's either, people look at it, it's either good or it's bad. And so, you know, and you taste the food, it's either good or it's bad.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you don't get to explain. So you got to really strive to make it to where, I used to say, I really want to do architecture for truckers. And that's not to insult any of the truckers out there, but I want the architecture to be self-explanatory. You know, I don't want you to need a degree from Pratt, right, to understand what this thing is about. I want you to just be able to see it and get it and take it, and that's it.
But at the same time, you and I could sit down with a drink and go deep, deep, deep into just one detail.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say at the same time, there's a whole lot more that you can talk about if you want to, but there ought to be something just there that just bubbles to the surface about the thing, where it just hits you in a way that hopefully to God is pleasant and pleasing. And yeah, if you want to get into the minutia, we can go into all that, but it ought to just have something that right off the bat just tastes good, feels good, looks good.
Frank Lloyd Wright, what it was, this famous quote was, surgeons have it easy. If they make a mistake, all they can do, they can cover it up with a pretty scar. All an architect can do is recommend to grow vines.
No, yeah, he said, I think my memory of that quote, he said, doctors bury their mistakes. All an architect can do is tell his client to plant ivy.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Good. Okay, so the first question was, thank you for designing tiny home cottages. I live in Philly suburbs in an old historic home. Beautiful old houses are being torn down and new ones are being built that are not too often in sync with the characteristics of communities. Homes that are not a gift of the street, causing residents to be disillusioned that communities are changing for the worse. What are your thoughts on current trends?
Oh my gosh.
I know,
wow.
It's a tough one.
This guy's already drank the Kool-Aid that we already drank a long time ago. It's that, you know, that our profession, in some instances, in many instances, has failed the public in terms of, you know, replacing these beautiful old, you know, wonderful historic homes with things that are you know, edifices that are McMansions and those kind of things or have happened, and I don't know how to fix that, honestly, and there's smarter people than me that have tried to, and I'm not sure that they've been totally successful, but all I know to do is to try to do, as my wife says, the next right thing, and in our work, and try to make beautiful places for people to see. But yeah, there's too many examples of neighborhoods that have been taken over and not beautiful things replaced.
Right. The next question is, you mentioned after you graduated college, you became twice the history student you had before. Can you expound on how a firm understanding of history, architectural and non-architectural, can inform the architect on how to create timeless, beautiful spaces? In other words, from an architectural perspective, how does understanding the past inform the people about the present?
Man, that's a great question. I don't know how to, I'm not sure I can answer. You guys can probably answer that question better than I can, especially the last part. But I think just speaking for me, I found an inability to create at least from scratch at the time at that point in my career, right, which was the very beginning of my career, having been just fresh out of college. I just wasn't prepared, not because I had not been taught well, but because I didn't have the knowledge myself to create architecture at the level that I wanted to create it. And I felt also that there was something inherently wrong with or not right about the few little things that I had done. And so in my soul searching for a better way forward, I looked backwards and looked to the past and found some things that somehow I had missed in my zeal to only move forward and to be this kind of futurist and do these things that were very appealing to me, but that I didn't have the understanding of how to pull off. And that just totally, that kind of, I guess for me, it just repositioned my trajectory to be, I guess, more of a vernacular type of architect. And I think there's wonderful modern buildings. I mean, there's things that I think are absolutely breathtaking that today we consider really modern. I don't know if in 200 years people will still consider that modern. It's modern now, but you know, one day maybe it's just considered a piece of sculpture or a piece of art. I don't know, but that's the best answer I could offer.
And the second part of that question, you know, how does understanding the past inform people about the people about the present? I mean, I had one opportunity. I'm embarrassed to say I've only been in one Lutyens project, the British Embassy, and I had the opportunity to walk through with a bunch of architects and designers, and we were all pretty much blown away by the details that in some cases we wouldn't even let off the drafting table. They were so modern and so out of the box. And when you look at that, you say, to me, what he was doing is using the past to capture a modern zeitgeist of what's around you and how to move forward, as opposed to using the past to reproduce the past.
Yeah.
And so,
right. That's a great way to say it. And I was going to say, while you were talking, my answer to that last question that is, I have begun to see the past as a way forward in the form of understanding the present as a continuum, right? And so the work that I think all of us are doing is connected to the past, but not a regurgitation of it. So that we are reinterpreting some of that and coming up with maybe even a few, you know, little wrinkles of our own, but there is something also connected to the past and something that we would look at and say that it feels familiar, but then at the same time, hopefully we are being inventive and we are being creative and we are pushing the envelope and making houses for today's lifestyle and for today's living. And so, but there's so you see it as a continuum to the past and to be a connector to that energy of the past and that understanding of the past, but to do something that is actually, frankly, very maybe not new, but what's the word? Relevant
right.
for today.
So the next question is, you mentioned in your book that you were always, were highly influenced by arts and crafts period and how it celebrated creativity as a way of life rather than a style. How, in your view, has our current society shifted in how it defines creativity? In your opinion, has the contemporary world shaped what it is and is not accepted as creative? How do you manage these conflicting views of staff, clients, critics, etc.? Are there differences? Are the differences reconcilable? Are the places where the points of view can come from? That's a big question. But,
Shit, that was about 6 questions in there.
that's right. And when you're done, I'll serve you dinner.
Well, I'll just try to tackle one, which I think was the sort of genesis of that stream of consciousness. I'd love for you to email me that question, because it was sort of fun. I think I could, there was a lot to unpack there. But in terms of one of the wonderful things I think about the arts and crafts movement that I still feel in my spirit and in my soul with, that we try to celebrate, and people ask us about this a lot, has to do with craft, and it has to do with artisan, and it has to do with what they would have called back then the worker. Okay, and so it has to do with the stonemason, right, and their level of craft, and understanding, you know, from them how that needs to work, and then but then sometimes how we want to challenge them with something that maybe they haven't seen or done exactly in that way before. And I just have been working with some amazing masons, and we have been playing around with brick and stone and doing all these different crazy things, and carpentry and beams and carving and plaster and all of these things that have to do with, you don't have to be an artist, you don't have to be the architect to be a creative person. And at its height, that with the carpentry and with the cabinet makers and with the stonemasons, that there is an artisan, an artisanal level with which they approach their work, and that they are proud, you know, of the level of detail and excellence that they can achieve. And I'm working with these people, and sort of, I'm more like the conductor, right? I'm just kind of the guy with the baton. They're the guy playing the flute, playing the oboe, and playing the drums. But together, in concert together, that we are making this amazing, beautiful thing. And that is art.
Well said.
Well, you know, that makes me think of we were talking yesterday, David, you and I, about, and the Ruskin, you know, he was one of these guys who reacted to the industrialization of architecture, and that's why he was drawn to the medieval architecture of England. And then that ended up becoming some of the genesis of the arts and crafts movement.
That's right.
And so he talked about the worker, and how, you know, he romanticized it, obviously, because life is better when it's a bit romantic.
Yeah.
But he would look at the work and the sculpture of these anonymous cathedral builders and say he could see the love that they put into their work.
Exactly.
It would emanate back out. And that's what came to mind when you were talking about, you were the conductor of drawing these emotions out of these people. But to give a little horn blast to what we do as designers, there is also a love that we do, which is what you expressed when you said, I feel closest to God when I create. That's because God is love. So that's when you're in that unintellectualizable space. And so it just kind of goes from there.
Yeah, 100%. But there is this thing, and I think it even goes to one of the other questions that the person had, you know, about, you know, some of the McMansion-y kind of thing. And he didn't say that word, but I'm using that word. And I think, you know, when you look at those buildings, they're the antithesis of craft. When you look at it, it's crap, not craft. And it's just a bunch of systems that have all been slapped together in not the most harmonious way, and not the most thoughtful way, by people that, you know, from sometimes the client who just wants this big edifice to say, look how much money I made. And it's sort of overwrought with ego, to builders who are really just doing it for the money. You know, they're not doing it for the love. They're not doing it for the craft. They're just, you know, the quicker that you can slap those pad on brick and up there and get the hell off my job, the quicker I can get my check and move on. And I think you're just looking at, you know, sort of the, I guess, some of the not better angels of our nature when it comes to what we're doing. And I think that we have to examine those things and call those things out.
It's sad that it's been 22 years since Sarah Sazonka wrote The Not So Big House, which basically said, take your budget, build a smaller house with a higher quality and higher designers. Your resale value is going to be more at the end. And basically, where are we since that was written? I mean, I have a next question, maybe the last question. Isn't the fundamental problem that architects aren't taught, nor practice, excuse me, I'm gonna start again. Isn't the fundamental problem that architects aren't taught, nor does practice reward the civic responsibility of design of any one building, especially in a town, city, campus context? In our focus on sustainability, technology, program specifics, cost reduction, client aspirations, or architect stardom, architects seem to have become too project focused and not enough place focused.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree that there's a lot of truth to some of those statements. And sometimes I'll be honest, you know, in my work, in our work as a firm, we're mostly placemaking at a very intimate level for families, you know, which still, you know, you drive by the street, maybe you see it if it's on a street. A lot of times it's not even on a street. I think it's I do agree with the questioner's comment that, to me, the bar gets even much more elevated when you're talking about civic architecture and college architecture, you know, placemaking in of the cities, because, you know, we don't really have a choice to avoid that or not. We're going to see it, we're going to experience it. And so to me, the bar is even higher in those cases, and for that reason.
So we had one more question just pop up, and it's a trade secret, and you have to give one trade secret up every lecture. So here we go. A purely technical question. Given your incredible, beautiful, clean timber and stonework, etc., it's amazing. I'm in awe. How do you tend to hide the insulation layer? And are the timber joints typically concealed mortise and tenon?
What insulation? What insulation layer? Just kidding. So it's a great question, right? Of course, in the South, you know, insulation is less of a factor than it is when we get to work in Canada or way up in New York somewhere that has, or out in the mountains out west. Good Lord, it gets really cold out there. I just couldn't believe how thick we had to make the insulation on a recent project out there. I think it actually had to be like 11 inches thick. That was kind of nuts. It was up in the mountains, but let's see. Okay. It depends. A lot of times, you know, we're using the foam spray-in insulation that has a really high R value, much higher than we were using even, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, before the foams really became, you know, so prevalent. But in general, how we do it is, there's really two structures, right? There is the structure of, let's say, did he ask about the roof, like in a roof condition or something?
I think he was talking about more about just the walls in general.
Okay. Well, it especially comes to the forefront in the roof condition. And a lot of times what we're doing is we're actually creating two structures. And this goes to kind of a question that we touched on the other day about architecture. I've said that good architecture is a lot about a mirage. There's a lot of, you know, what I call trickitecture going on. And so we'll insulate the actual rafter structure, the roof structure, and that's where the insulation is. And then we actually will create underneath that structure the timbers. And so in a way that, you know, the timbers aren't fake, they're real material, and they're solid, but they are not structurally, you know, holding up, you know, the whole thing. And that tends to work a lot better and gives you the best insulation value, even though there is some slight sacrifice in my purest heart of authenticity, you know, in those cases. And I've done it before where we really built it out of timber frame, and then we only insulated, you know, in between the timber frame, but then you still have some really poorly functioning from a insulation perspective roof line, because there's places where that timber goes all the way to the roof, and so you don't have good insulation at that, and that causes a whole bunch of other problems with condensation and stuff. So anyway, long-winded answer.
So I feel like we've been with you for 2 hours from the beginning, an hour and a half on film. Thank you so much. I mean, this is amazing. Thank you again to New England chapter of the ICAA, who's helped us co-sponsor along with Traditional Building Magazine and Residential Design Magazine. And Jeffrey, like, this is a huge commitment for you. Thank you very much for sort of sharing your passion.
I was really honored to be here. I really was. And all the discussions were very edifying to me. You know, it's great to see and even just share an hour with other people who believe many of the same things. And so that was inspirational for me as well. Thank y'all so much for having me.
Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you
so
very much.
generously.
Bye-bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks again for coming.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.